Hello, welcome. Let's go once again. It is I, the great Sama 77, self-proclaimed Let's Goat, and I am here with joyous news of me winning the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee Spring Seasonal. This is a momentous occasion. I have won both, or the past two seasonals now, and I have defended my title as being one of the top Let's Go players. Now, um, due to my victory, I decided to celebrate with the glorious tier list. I know a viability ranking update is being in the works right now. However, I cannot be bothered to engage with small bureaucracy, so I'm not going to submit anything through that. Instead, I will be making this tier list. If they choose to accept it as a top player engaging in a viability ranking, so be it. But given Smogon's political nature, I highly doubt that will be the case. But hey, you never know. In the meantime, what I care about more, anyways, is distributing resources to new players as well as generating discussion amongst experienced ones as to the best Pokemon in the tier. And that's what we're going to do today. Um, Now, this is not probably going. This is somewhere in the mix between beginner friendly and expert friendly. It's going to get into some deeper discussion, but it's also going to still be a good example of, hey, these Pokemon are good and you should use them if you are a new player. So there's that. Um, this is also, of course, my opinion, although I'd like to think that winning the past two seasonals is a pretty good justification for the opinion as well. I don't think anyone would argue that I'm at least top two in the tier, along with Sablette, so take that what you will. Um, and yeah, so I have a more closed mind on the viability of a lot of Pokemon in Let's Go. I actually don't believe in like a third of these Pokemon, but I figured I'd rank them just for completionist's sake, I guess. I'm The way I'm going to rank is we have the S through B. I don't really need to explain what those are. You've probably seen a tier list before. Cutoff for usability is both going to be what I think the OU cutoff is, and the cutoff for I don't think anybody should ever be bringing any Pokemon in the garbage tier to any kind of match. I probably wouldn't be really comfortable bringing anything in B plus or B tier anyways. I only like to use the best. I play to win, not to have fun. There's nothing wrong with playing fun, of course. And we do need people to try weirder stuff in order to understand the meta a bit more. Certainly, people weren't using Vaporeon so little as 3 years ago. However, uh, I believe in playing with strong, consistent tools. That's mainly what this tier list is going to reflect. So if those tools aren't strong and aren't consistent, I'm never going to use them personally, and I'm going to call them what I think they are, which is not worth using or garbage. Now, with that said, I'm not going to go over how to battle in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. You'd have to go and figure out how to do that yourself. It's not that hard, I'd say. It's actually one of the easier tiers to learn, even though it is very skill based. I think it's got a pretty high floor. If you're using the right tools, not being overly ambitious with how you plan to use your tools. With that said, if I can remember to, I will link the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee Discord in the link. So come join there, have a blast. We're all going to party. And if you want justifications for these choices, sometime within this week, assuming I get permission from all of the people I played in the tournament, I will be analyzing my replays. I've already gotten some, but I want to get as many as possible, just so I can give you guys the best analysis possible, or the most analysis. Anyways, without further ado, let's start ranking Pokemon. I know this is going to be very shocking. Use the best Pokemon in the tier. And while I'm doing this, it's going to be no secret that this is number 2, but we're going to talk about Mew first, because Mew is number 1 after all. Now, Mew is by far the best Stealth Rock setter in the tier. I know this feels like a bit of a backhand compliment to be like, hey, this is the best Pokemon in the tier. Use it as a Stealth Rocker. But it is true. This is the only Pokemon with reasonable recovery that can set up Stealth Rocks. Obviously, other things can use Rest, but they're not very good at it. this is also the only Pokemon that's going to provide any kind of realistic defensive backbone and perform any kind of stalling against your opponent. And we know how important that can be in competitive Pokemon, especially in a tier that moves so fast, as Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee does. Mew is generally just going to be the main glue that holds your team together against something like, I don't know, Mega Aerodactyl with nothing to lose when there's a chip Melmetal. I think that the best set is still Stealth Rocks, Psychic, U-Turn, and Soft Boiled. It's the most flexible. It helps the most amount of Pokemon get in. Getting in can be pretty obnoxious in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and having Mew take that first hit is generally better a lot of the time. With this, I recommend running a slower Mew. Sableye actually did Speed Snipe me. I was waiting for it to happen for like 2 years, but it did finally happen. Where they started deliberately underspeeding because they know I like to underspeed my Mews. But still, an underspeed Mew compared to other Mews is still going to get in a lot easier. It's going to be very good at positioning your Pokemon. Psychic's just good, strong stab. You don't even need to tell you why it's probably better. Important to note that a Psychic Mew will usually still easily beat a Dugtrio Alola. They can use Toxic and they can cripple your Mew long term, so sometimes it always doesn't go that way. But yeah, Psychic Mew, very good. Does a good amount more to Melmetal than you think as well. So that's a potential option, you know, if you need to chip Melmetal just to get that into, I say, Mega Beedrill range or Mega Aerodactyl range. That is definitely your option there. Past that, I think the next best set is easily Toxic Flamethrower. It can be very obnoxious to get rid of depending on your team comp, and some teams just can't deal with it at all. It's definitely worse against something like a Gengar or a Mega Beedrill, but this is also the best Mew set at handling other Mew sets without just going into some complete like matchup fish like Taunt. I never recommend Taunt on Mew. I think it's a fake move and doesn't actually accomplish as much as you think it would, and it requires too perfect a play for it to be realistically good. But Toxic Mew is definitely a good option. Nothing really wants to switch into Toxic in this tier, and if they do, they probably don't like switching into Flamethrower unless you're going to indulge in the Alolan Muck wave. Hits Melmetal obviously super hard. Gets most of Dugtrio Alola down. It's obviously not going to chunk things like Zapdos very well, but hey, it does still work. I think it's a very good set. Definitely the best at handling opposing Mew, and sometimes that's all you really need, because Mew can be very hard to get rid of for certain teams like a Mega Aerodactyl team. Past that, I think all setup sweeper Mews kind of all fit the bill. Giving up Stealth Rocks on your Mew is pretty bad, because usually I'd say it feels like you're kind of running a not a full Pokemon, but a 0.75 Pokemon, because they're just going to get up rocks and they're going to die most of the time. I don't like using any other Stealth Rocker but Mew. It just feels wrong to me. I know some people disagree. I think Clefable does have merit. I don't think Clefable is definitely unusable, far from it, but I'm just not a big fan of it. But it is true that Mew can just sometimes win condition your opponent. I think Nasty Plot is still the best setup sweeper, and specifically Nasty Plot with Psychic, Flamethrower, and Mega Drain. Please do not use Psychic Thunderbolt. You're going to look like a fool when Dugtrio Toxics you, Earthquakes you, and then you're just going to get revenge killed by like a Mega Aerodactyl immediately afterwards. Please don't do that. Past that, I think that the next best set is actually something that Sableye used against me yesterday that I wasn't expecting, which was a Barrier, Calm Mind, Dark Pulse Rest. I think it definitely has potential. It's unfortunate for them that I brought a Mega Beedrill, because it definitely could have worked had I not brought Mega Beedrill. Against an Arrow or something similar, I definitely could see it. Now, granted, with a set like that, you're kind of playing more into the, well, they're not going to crit me kind of game. Now, Mew is probably the Pokemon that can most afford to get crit in the tier because it has so much bulk and because it's so much better. But I do think it's actually much worse to bring a set like this, or Bulk Up Mew, which I'd regard as probably the third best setup sweeper Mew set. Just in your opponent having Gengar or Beedrill is just so annoying for any kind of setup Mew set, because you have to cross that threshold of where they can't 3-hit KO you by the time that you rest with something like that. And obviously Toxic will just shut down anyone that isn't rest, so you have to use rest if you're going to use a elongated set. I think Nasty Plot's much more immediate and much more effective. Generally, I find that Nasty Plot Mew tends to take about 2 Pokemon, or at least cleanly take out one and mostly chip the other, which you can say is maybe worth it if you are using something like Clefable for rocks. Um, but yeah, I think that U-turn and Toxic Flamethrower are definitely the ways to go. I think setup sweeper Mew sets are a little bit below that, but it definitely still can work. It's definitely still good. It's pretty viable to say that the best Pokemon in the tier is good at setup sweeping. I just think it's a bit more all or nothing and a bit more of a matchup fish, personally. Uh, One thing I will note is that I do not believe in Will-O-Wisp Psychic Mew whatsoever. I think you're playing just a literal downgrade of Toxic Flamethrower. Um, the Pokemon you're going to be hitting with Will-O-Wisp generally like getting hit with Toxic a lot less. I guess that's not true for like a Mega Aerodactyl or a Melmetal, but I think you're kind of insane if you're keeping those Pokemon in against a Mew anyways, because they're going to be crippled down so much later by just you clicking a different move. Don't super recommend it. But yeah, that's Mew. It's the best Pokemon in the tier. You should never be running one, or whenever you're running a team without it. Even if you're not going to indulge in Stealth Rocks, it's still outstatting everything that isn't a Mega, or tying with something like Melmetal or Dragonite, although Dragonite's cap, and I don't recommend using it at all. Yeah, use this Pokemon. If you're new to the tier, use Stealth Rocks of some kind. Leave the swooping to the pros. Trust me, it's not as easy as it sounds. But yeah, very good. Always run this. And like I said, I think U-turn Stealth Rocks is the best set, especially if you're slightly underspeeding your Mew, because it gives you the best positioning, and switching can be kind of hard. Brings in Pokemon like Mega Beedrill that doesn't like coming in otherwise. Can bring in Rhydon if you're getting the right switch. It's just very good. Now, Melmetal is a lot simpler, and I don't have as much to say, other than that it's very good. It's going to 1v1 most Pokemon in the tier, and it's usually going to be your Mega Check. Double Iron Bash is strong, of course. Hit a Mew with like that, and they can't just roost that off. But generally, I find that's a bit more rare, because Mew is generally going to be able to threaten Melmetal most of the time, so usually people will throw Zapdos against this and they'll start playing 50-50s with Reflect, Ice Punch, Earthquake, all that jazz. Fun stuff. Very let's go. But at the end of the day, usually your opponent's going to send a Mega Evolution out and you're going to send Melmetal in. I think it's more straightforward, but I don't think it's as easy to use as people think. All it takes is one wrong prediction on your part. Mega Aerodactyl clicking Earthquake as your Melmetal comes in. And Earthquake's a pretty good move to click in this tier. So yeah, against teams that are using something like Mega Blastoise Z, usually this might actually check something like the Dugtrio instead. Also fun stuff, great. Pokemon is very good, of course. Run it on every team. You're gonna look like an idiot if you don't, because you're gonna get easily swept by Mega Beedrill or Mega Aerodactyl or something like that. Also, Mega Venusaur, this is usually a good check to that, but it depends a bit on the situation of the battle and what the Mega Venusaur is running. If they're running Reflect, it might be a little bit worse. If they're running Sleep Powder, they might just put you out of commission, but there is never a reason not to use Melmetal in this tier, and I recommend that you bring it to every match that you do. One other thing I should probably say before I didn't mention natures yet. Mew, I think, like I said, should be running a minus, or should not be running a plus speed nature if you're using U-turn. You can even lower the speed on it a little bit. I'm partial to Bold Mew, personally. But Melmetal, because Eve so lovingly speed crept the tier, should always be Jolly. I know it seems silly, but that is actually a good 50-50 to win a lot of the time. Can give you some bailout options just by Double Iron Bash, flinching all of your Melmetals. And yeah, not much more to say. Double Iron Bash is a good move. Melmetal has good stats, checks every Mega. Moving on. Now, the next Pokemon I rank actually is going to be a Mega Evolution. I don't think it's going to be a secret, since I'm saying that the next Pokemon's going to be, so... Boop. Before that, I'm going to go on the policy of rating Mega Evolution Pokemons. I get that some people don't like ranking Mega Evolutions in a tier list like this, because they're a different type of opportunity cost. And you're not, for example, you're going to bring a Mega to your game, so it's a bit unfair to compare something like this. Obviously, if I'm bringing Mega Aerodactyl just as is, not having to go through regular Aerodactyl, of course I'm going to bring it on every team because it's just that good. We're going to all bring like multiple Megas, but it's important to remember that my idea of this tier list is who is going to help you win the game the most. And I think that this is the next Pokemon that will help you win the most outside of the necessary pieces. I think this Pokemon's very good. So I am going to rank Megas along with the rest. I think that judging them in the individuality of what they bring to the team is important. So I'm going to have that in there. Now, with that said, why is Mega Aerodactyl so good? And why am I ranking it over Pokemon I have ranked over it in the past instead? A simple fact is, like so many other Pokemon that I'm going to talk about, this is the highest chance of doing something. Whenever you bring it to a game, there's never a game where you're going to bring Mega Aerodactyl and you're going to be like, man, I'm so upset that I brought Mega Aerodactyl. No, that's not going to happen because Mega Aerodactyl is just that guy. It is the fastest Pokemon in the tier, or at least tied, I guess, with Electrode. And it has coverage for everything, and it's going to do things that other Pokemon can't. It's going to be the cleanest revenge killer of Jolteon. Yes, Mega Beedrill can do it. But still, Mega Aerodactyl's still a little bit better at it because, say your opponent's got like a plus defense Jolteon, which Sableye did bring against me. Mega Beedrill might not have actually gotten that kill, and Mega Aerodactyl would have. It's just very good. It also has the highest hacking potential probably out of any Pokemon in the tier, which is saying a lot, because sometimes you'll just YOLO and Ice Beam and it'll work. That happened a lot during the Mega Cloyster, or not Mega Cloyster, but just Cloyster days. Rock-Slide Flinch can just win you the game on the spot. It's bailed me out in more than one game. It's just very good move to click. Aerodactyl just has good moves. Fast Earthquake is actually more annoying in this tier than most because you don't have something like a Lando T to fall back on. And anything that has Earthquake probably has a move for something that resists or is immune to that Earthquake. For example, you can't just switch Zapdos in on Mega Aerodactyl. No, that's not going to work. It's a very good move to click. You have Crunch for the Mew, although generally Mew is going to be able to outstall, especially if it's using a plus defense, which I think is the best nature on Mew. But that's partially because Mega Aerodactyl is just so good. Now, I do prefer using Adamant on my Mega Aerodactyl, but that's mostly because of a philosophy thing, whereas I feel like running the nature on the Pokemon that's going to actually hit important thresholds and actually be able to do more damage and make the ranges I take more consistent. And if I'm doing Jolly, the only reason I'm running Jolly is so that I speed tie another Mega Aerodactyl, because none of the other Pokemon are going to outspeed it anyways. And if I'm banking on a 50-50, I'd rather just outplay my opponent and win that way. Now, that said, Sable's a very good player, and I didn't pick Jolly Aerodactyl versus her because I wanted that 50-50 just in case. I mean, that's the main argument for running a Jolly Arrow, is just in case you do want that 50-50. But yeah. This Pokemon also shuts down Mega Beedrill. It is generally the main deterrent for Mega Beedrill just wreaking havoc and being brought to every game. It's the only Pokemon besides Melmetal that will ever act as a check to that thing, because that thing is crazy. And this Pokemon is just always going to do something. It's never going to falter. I'm not partial to Roost, although I see the appeal. I feel like generally if you're clicking the right turns or clicking the right moves on the right turns anyways, Mega Aerodactyl is generally going to be unstoppable regardless. So it feels a bit unnecessary. Sorry, to use recovery with that. It can have objective situations where it is better. Like if your opponent's going to switch into a second to Mega Aerodactyl and you get more HP, then you can use it a bit more later. But generally, I'm preferring Wing Attack in case I run into like a Mega Venusaur or something like that. Get a bit more damage. I'm going to switch the music real quick. Give me a second. Anyways, this is very good Pokemon. Wing Attack will just get through Venusaur sometimes. Poliwrath isn't really as common, but again, I don't really like running Roost anyways. Only thing I really don't like about Mega Aerodactyl is that Rock Slide can miss. But you don't have to click Rock Slide most of the time anyways. You can get away with clicking Earthquake because both are similar in power. But hey, Rock Slide also has flinched and gotten me through games that way much more than it has just like fail to hit the opponent. Because generally you don't want to click Rock Slide if you can help it. Obviously you have to run it anyways. But yeah, very good. Best revenge killer in the tier. Can break through walls. If your Melmetal ever gets chipped, suddenly you're in a bad position if you're staring down an Aerodactyl. Very good. Highly recommend this. This is the best Pokemon to use if you want to win. And Let's Go Pikachu. Now, it can be counter picked. It does not like running into a Pokemon like Mega Blastoise Z, but even then, it still has the highest odds of being able to play around your opponent. And this is a Pokemon you should be using if you're going to run any Mega. The only reason it's not S is because there are definitely other viable options for your Mega Evolution. This has a higher opportunity cost. And we'll get into those soon, but right now, let's go back to our regular Pokemon, and I think Alolan Dugtrio is the next best Pokemon in the tier. Now, I have been a long time supporter of Alolan Dugtrio. I think at one point I had it in S tier instead of S minus. It's fallen a bit down for me. I don't know if I ranked it S ever since the Mega Alakazam ban. I don't really care enough to check, but I mean, if you're going to talk about Pokemon that usually do something in any given match, like Aerodactyl, Dugtrio is right here. Like I said, Earthquake is just a very good move to click in this tier, because nothing, yes, things obviously resist, or there's defensive, like, Quake Slide is just good in general. But it's worse in this tier because nothing really likes switching into that combination. There's no Lando T, for example. It's just stuff like that. It's just very annoying. Alolan Dugtrio outspeeds all the base 100s in the tier, aka Mew and Zapdos, and I guess Charizard, although I don't believe in that Pokemon. We'll get to why later. This Pokemon just, it like always does something in any given match. There's been a few times where I've just sacked it, and it hasn't performed, but Zapdos check alone is already a good selling point because Zapdos is going to be on most teams because Zapdos is so good. This can be an emergency Mew shutdown Pokemon. Say if the Mew is like trying to boost, you Toxic it and suddenly its time is limited. Substitute obviously just gives you a free move, and like I said, nothing really wants to switch in. Even if something like Melmetal comes in, it's not going to like taking that Earthquake, because whatever is going to attack it afterwards, say like Mega Aerodactyl, really doesn't like getting chipped down by that thing. So why isn't this higher? I've never run a team without Alolan Dugtrio in recent memories because I think it's always done more. And the simple answer is I just feel like sometimes it just doesn't feel as good as you want it to be. Mew can check it pretty well. Yes, you can Toxic it, but you're kind of running into a weird situation where it's going to break down your substitutes and you don't have recovery, whereas it does, and it feels like you might just trade. Now, granted, that might sound good as a trade versus a Mew and Dugtrio, but you have to remember that's usually with Mew getting Stealth Rocks up. So that's minus trade for you. And once your Dugtrio goes down, it's harder to check Zapdos. Part of the reason it's also gotten worse is because people have started speccing into Zapdoses that beat Dugtrio more, whether that be an agility set that Sablette used against me because she knows I like to run this a lot and knows I would never bring Rhydon, which I won't. Or using a Reflectro Peck set will usually easily beat the Dugtrio. It's part of the reason I always recommend Toxic. I don't like I don't like Sucker Punch or Stealth Rock Dugtrio. I don't like Sucker Punch because it feels like you're playing into your opponent too much. I can't stand that. And you're playing too many read games. It's not going to do much, I feel, as Toxic is. Once you Toxic a Mew, then it's suddenly more or less out of commission when you bring in your own Mew. It just shutdowns annoying things more. It will help. It's part of the reason I don't like Alolan Executor at all. More on that later. It's because Alolan Dugtrio will just Toxic it, and then they'll go to Mew and they'll wall you out. It just has so much good synergy. And, I mean, its substitute is so good because, like I said, Quake Slide just hits so much of the tier, and it's so annoying to deal with sometimes. Alolan Dugtrio is definitely an elite Pokemon for sure. It just has the tendency sometimes to not do as much as you want it to. But I still feel like in 95% of all games, Alolan Dugtrio is going to do something worthwhile and impactful, and it's going to help win you the game. And it's generally a lot harder to check in the team builder. I don't think that Venusaur is a great check because it has to take that Earthquake usually before it can Mega Evolve and get its plus bulk, and by that point it's taking a lot of damage. It's not that good of a check, even though you always have to switch it. It's messy. Dual Electro teams are so good, and partially because they remove the one threat that you need to get rid of, which is Dugtrio, with something like Jolteon before you like switch to Zapdos, just nuking everything. This is a very good Pokemon. Uh, just to be able to like stop that Zapdos, it is going to be on most teams. Toxic that Mew in case it gets out of hand. Get that Earthquake on that Melmetal in case it's going to start going. It's just a very good Pokemon. I just think that the variance potential that Mega Aerodactyl has is a bit higher. Mega Aerodactyl can just win the game if it wants to with enough Rock Slide flinches and just clicking the right moves. Dugtrio is kind of a similar way, and I will probably still never run a team without it, but it has gotten a little worse in my eyes. Now, this might be the part where you expect me to put Zapdos as the next Pokemon, but it's actually not what I'm going to put the next Pokemon as. The next Pokemon I'm going to put on the list is Mega Beedrill. Now, this is kind of a little insane. I feel like most people would think, I can't believe you're putting Mega Beedrill over Zapdos. Why is it an S minus tier? And that, dear viewer, is why I'm going to tell you that Mega Beedrill is by far the best Pokemon in the tier at breaking through any kind of nonsense your opponent thinks that they can get away with. Now, what do I mean by that? Is even though, yes, Mega Beedrill does get checked by Melmetal, it's significantly worse as a Mega check. Or let me rephrase that. Melmetal is much better at checking Aerodactyl than it is at checking Beedrill. And that is because Beedrill's just simply going to U-turn out. Mega Aerodactyl is so similarly frail to Beedrill where it doesn't really want to take any hit. Yes, it can take a hit better than Beedrill can, but I feel like Beedrill's just going to it's just going to U-turn on everything, and it's so annoying. It's part of the reason I'm ranking Mega Aerodactyl above Dugtrio is because it's checking the only thing that is just going to run through the entire rest of the tier. Outside of that Melmetal, which isn't that hard to chip. If you're ever in a position where you're cooking X-Scissor as Beedrill, then that's just so bad. Say you're doing against a Mew, either you're taking the kill or you're getting chip on Melmetal, which is so disastrous for the Melmetal because it's going to take like one of those and then it's just going to die to the next combination of like X's or U-turn, and then you just suddenly sweep the rest of the game. It's a similarly, if not better, revenge killer than Mega Aerodactyl because it can always reposition itself just by using U-turn. This thing is so annoying to deal with. It also completely warps the entire lead metagame too. The second it's ever shown, if there's not a Mega Beedrill in the field, generally most players are going to lead Mew. But the second Mega Beedrill is thrown into the equation, the entire society of the lead metagame in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee just changes because your opponents will be like, well, what if they just lead Beedrill and they click U-turn and then suddenly my Mew's at like 78 and then I have to be on the back foot for a little while and it's messy. No one wants to play a messy game. And so that's why Mega Beedrill is just that guy. He is just so much that guy that he is very, very good. I bring him to a lot of games. He's probably my second used team overall as a Mega Beedrill team, and it's going to break any kind of nonsense your opponent thinks you can get away with. If your opponent thinks they can get away with a setup Sweeper Mew, Mega Beedrill is probably going to be the one answer to not getting through that. If they're going to bring something like an Alolan Muck, Mega Beedrill is going to do that. Mega Beedrill is going to make a Clefable much less likely to stay in because they're afraid of Poison Jab. They're afraid of losing the game on the spot by not getting Stealth Rocks up. Mega Beedrill is going to destroy Mega Venusaur, and is part of the reason I think Mega Venusaur has gotten worse. It's even with Zapdos, I'd say. Or, sorry, not Zapdos, but Mega Blastoise. I think there's a slight advantage because U-turn is such a good and easy move to click with Mega Beedrill. But, yeah. Drill Run can OHKO most Jolteons, so it runs into that similar position that Mega Aerodactyl does. Starmie, it's going to OHKO Starmie. It's very few Pokemon can do that outside of this guy and Jolteon. Crunch does not come close to doing it. It's just a very, very annoying Pokemon to play against, and it's just so good. If Mega Aerodactyl didn't exist, Mega Beedrill would probably get banned, if I'm being honest. It's just so hard to play against. But Mega Aerodactyl does exist, and it's the best Pokemon out of all the megas, I'd say, and so you should be using that still. But if you ever think your opponent is not going to run Mega Aerodactyl, run Mega Beedrill. It's so hard to play against. It's awful. I hate playing against it, but I do be running Mega Aerodactyl a lot, so usually I can get the job done. Now, I'm not actually going to rank the next Pokemon in S minus tier. This is my last S minus tier Pokemon. But it's probably not going to shock. The next one is going to be Zapdos. Now, Zapdos is historically one of the best Pokemon in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee overused. So putting number 6 is kind of just a little bit crazy, I'd say. But let me explain why. For starters, Zapdos can never run all the moves it wants to. It wants to use all of Thunderbolt, Roost, U-Turn, Reflect, Toxic, and Drill Peck, but it has to choose 4. Now, you're never going without Thunderbolt or Roost, so you have 4 to pick from. And that kind of runs into a team dynamic, I'd say, at that point. I think Reflect should be on all Zapdos. I think Reflect is a bit too good to pass up. It provides a secondary catch-all check to the Mega Aerodactyl and Mega Beedrill that is so good. It's the one that's going to deal with Melmetal the most, and I think you should be running that. Oh, Agility too. I should probably add that since Sableye did beat me with it yesterday. After that, it gets messy. Toxic is very good if you want to try and win against the opponent Zapdos. Or you think you can get away with doing it on you, which you can sometimes. U-Turn's very good so that your opponent just doesn't get to automatically send in Rhydon and Dugtrio with 0 fear each time. I actually had to switch to U-Turn myself because I realized Drill Peck wasn't doing enough against Sableye specifically. So I had to use that. You might want to run I think, did I say, yeah, you might want to run Drill Peck, though, just for that Mega Venusaur answer, and because Reflect Drill Peck is going to beat Dugtrio, or at least get it down to the point where it's not going to be a threat after that. So the 4 move slot syndrome's kind of kicking in hard, which is kind of crazy. Of all Pokemon to suffer from that is Zapdos, who famously, is Mr. T-Bolt, or Mr. T-Bolt, Roost, and then 2 coverage, and then U-Turn, or whatever, however you want to classify that, or you're just playing Gen 1, it's got 5 moves you can choose from. But it's true, and it's the reason why I think Zapdos has fallen a bit. Now, all this said, you'd be very, very foolish to think that Zapdos is not an incredible Pokemon in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. I'd say generally it's going to be your Melmetal half the time, and if you're not using a bulky water, then 90% of the time it's going to be your Melmetal answer. But it also still runs into the issue where obviously most teams are going to be prepared for it with an Alolan, Dugtrio, or a Rhydon. It can be a liability for a Rhydon coming in, getting that substitute, and suddenly you're going to lose a Pokemon, almost no questions asked. So it has gotten a bit worse, but again, it's still Zapdos at the end of the day. It can still usually beat most Pokemon one-on-one. It is important to note that if it somehow is at full HP, that a Rock Slide from Mega Aerodactyl won't take it out, so you can't use that. And it can use Reflect to beat that thing. Also does high damage to Mega Beedrill. With the rising importance of waters, this thing has also gotten more important, I'd say. But again, I feel like sometimes it just does not perform. Kind of in that, it's rare, but I feel like this, compared to every other Pokemon I've talked to already, has the least amount of chance of doing something. Sometimes you'll just get your turns wrong. They'll have their Dugtrio and Rhydon switches just right. Sometimes they'll just lose to the Mew anyways. They can't break through the Toxic Mew. Sometimes Zapdos will just not perform as well. And another thing that I want to quote is that Eve mentioned that Zapdos, I think in the past, is the most skill check, quote-unquote, standard mon in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee overused. And I actually agree with that. Right each time, or it's not going to do it for you. It's surprisingly hard for new people to use, even though Zapdos is, probably has the most history out of any Pokemon in this entire tier when you go back to competitive Pokemon. But hey, that just be how it is. I think this is definitely the most droppable Pokemon out of the 3 I've mentioned right here. I know some would definitely disagree with that, saying Alolan Dugtrio isn't nearly as good, but this is where I currently rank Zapdos. I think Zapdos definitely could fluctuate though in the future. It still does most things most matches, but sometimes it just doesn't, and that's why I'm going to put it there. Now, on to my next pick. This is where this is probably my spiciest take. The next Pokemon I'm going to rank is Jolteon. Now, this might be a bit of a surprise, considering I've been such a avid supporter of Vaporeon, and I think Blastoise is still very good, and that Rhydon can usually be used instead of Dugtrio anyways. But this is honestly how I feel. I noticed especially when Sableye brought a non. Well, I think it was still double electrics, or it could might have been, but they brought Jolteon against me a few times, and every time it was probably the biggest pain in the arse to fear. This Pokemon is so hard to switch in unless you're investing in a hyper specific counter, which I don't really like doing because even though Jolteon is so good, it feels like it's kind of hard to fit sometimes. There's definitely room for flexibility, as Sableye showed. But it's just so annoying. Talk about Pokemon that are going to do something and I'm getting matched. This Pokemon has 130 base speed and isn't getting outsped by anything that isn't a Mega Pokemon. It can be a Zapdos check in a pinch. You know, if you want to go groundless, I think you should definitely be using Jolteon. I don't like using Mega Venusaur or other things like that nearly as much. This Pokemon is just so good. It's so annoying to switch into. It's going to eventually break down your Mew if you're just clicking Shadow Balls and the Mew's just recovering. It might get a Spadef drop, or it can just completely change the tables by clicking Yawn or Substitute, or just any host of annoying moves. Reflect is also good on it. It can kind of be a win con, although I think generally it doesn't do as much damage as it potentially can. I have also been a long time Jolteon supporter, and even if it's doing something like just getting the Shadow Ball off on the Dugtrio, you know, if your Zapdos can win the game after that, then Zapdos is going to win the game after that, and your Dugtrio just got chipped, and now it can't perform nearly as well. This Pokemon is so good. It's so annoying. Generally, I feel like you have to sack whenever this thing hits the field. Now, it can be harder to get on the field. You know, it's not invincible. It's an A plus tier, not an S minus. But I think this thing also had a crazy high win rate throughout the entire tournament. I probably should have brought it a bit more, but I only have the double electrics team because I only like playing with tools I know and am comfortable using. But yeah, Pokemon is so good. I think this is probably the Pokemon I believe in the most in people being a bit more creative with it and finding new teams to explore with it. But yes, very good, very hard to switch in. Its counters are a bit too specific, and I think you're a bit less likely to run into them. Yes, you can be revenge killed by something like Mega Aerodactyl or Mega Beedrill, but it's still not like as great. Um, so yeah, next up, probably not going to be super surprising. But Vaporeon, I have also been a long time. Well, maybe not that long because Vaporeon hasn't been that standard for that long. Um, but I mean, this Pokemon's good. It also does something every match. I actually think that the evolutions are a little bit better than Zapdos at making sure something gets done each match. But Zapdos also just has a lot more potential to just run with the game. But back to Vaporeon. Vaporeon, very good. Clicks Surf very well. Surf is actually pretty hard to switch into in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And it has Shadow Ball to threaten Mew, or at least eventually break through Mew, because eventually it might just get that Spadef drop. It might just get that crit. Also has Yawn to make your opponents dance. Yawn is very annoying, and it's better at making your opponent dance, I'd say, than Jolteon is, because it can always take that one hit. This thing switches into a Melmetal better than pretty much anything else that isn't a Mega, I'd say. Zapdos, I guess, technically, but generally Zapdos feels like it wants to be doing other things. But yeah, Surf is very hard to switch into. Clicking Yawn makes your opponent dance, especially with the Stealth Rocks being irremovable. That's really good. This Pokemon is also single-handedly one of the reasons I think Alolan Executor is terrible, because this thing just takes it out. Please do not run anything that isn't Surf, Ice Beam, Shadow Ball, Yawn. I know some people like Protect. Please do not use Protect. I don't like it. Don't. I guess you could try using Toxic, although I think the Yawn is a much more immediate threat and much more annoying to deal with. Vaporeon is very good. I like bringing this Pokemon. It's a very comfortable Pokemon for me to bring. It's probably my favorite Pokemon in the tier um, to use, just because it's just very solid. That's the easiest way to describe Vaporeon. Very solid. It's usually going to do something, and it's usually going to do it pretty well. Uh, yeah. Now, lastly, I debated ranking this Pokemon as highly. But at the end, I was like, well, it kind of does do very similar things as Jolteon and Zapdos, and you probably know where I'm going with this if you're familiar with the tier. But it is Gengar. Gengar is the one Pokemon that I believe in the most that I don't use. That's simple because I don't know how to use it. But it'd be foolish to say that Gengar isn't good, because it is. And it actually runs a very similar role as these two other electrics right here, where it can just like completely demolish a team if given the chance. There are some pluses and minuses to using Gengar, though. I'd say your biggest plus for using Gengar is that it also, similar to Mega Beedrill, will make any Mew very scared to do anything cute. If you're running Toxic Flamethrower Mew, this is where it's like Gengar's time to shine. You're going to switch in Gengar once you've scouted that set, and you're going to click Shadow Ball, and nothing's going to want to switch into that in the tier. Gengar actually does somehow. I was shocked when I learned this fact like 2 years ago, but it actually does 1v1 Zapdos. Anything that switches into Shadow Ball on Gengar is going to hate taking it, basically. Because Dark types don't really exist, and Chansey has long been eroded. Gengar is just a very annoying Pokemon to deal with. Now, I don't use now. Well, I guess I should go with cons because that's going to really explain why I don't use it. The first thing that's really bad about Gengar compared to Jolteon, why I think Jolteon's better, is that if I ever send in Dugtrio, we're playing a 50-50, free to use your like exalted kill everything button. Whereas that's not going to happen with Jolteon. I feel like Jolteon you can have to play a bit better with for it to perform like Gengar. But there's no mistake that Gengar can still do it. Another good thing about Gengar is that it will usually beat Mega Venusaur, or at least cleanly. I kind of see Gengar occupying a similar space as Mega Beedrill, although it's obviously nowhere near as good. That's partially because, it's not a Mega, obviously, but it's going to break a lot of nonsense Mew sets. A Nasty Plot Mew is going to hate seeing this in Team Preview, because it's going to do such a big chunk and will likely stop the sweep it's trying to do. And it's also going to, like the Venusaur is usually less of a threat when this thing is around. Hard to switch into. Going to take a Pokemon usually. But unironically, being outsped or at least speed tying with Dugtrio is like it's just a 50-50 for the Gengar to not work. I guess you could use Sucker Punch, but again, I don't believe in that. And it still runs into the same issues as Jolteon, where these two Megas are going to handle it. It also doesn't deal with Zapdos as well as Jolteon does, which is part of the reason why Jolteon is so good. Is it actually can switch into Zapdos most of the time and just start popping off with Thunderbolts or Shadow Balls, whatever you feel. If it's Starmie's running Psychic, which they definitely can, Gengar is obviously also worse in that scenario. But it's still going to fulfill similar enough roles to Jolteon, where I think it warrants the A+, even though I don't personally use it, and I don't know if I'd ever run a team with it because it feels kind of awkward to fit, which is also part of the reason. Unlike using dual electrics, which has the clear synergy of beating down your opponent's ground type, Gengar doesn't feel like it has that synergy. It just feels like it does very good things, but it's a bit of a solo agent in things it does. Yeah. That said, very good Pokemon. Definitely can run it. I just personally don't feel comfortable using it, which is why I don't. But yeah. So next up on my glorious tier list is going to be Mega Blastoise. This is actually something I think these two definitely can be swapped. Both are very good Pokemon. I think in my initial version, I actually had Blastoise right here. But the thing is that I feel like the more popular other waters get, the worse Mega Blastoise becomes. It's just not performing the niche. If Melmetal's going to come in, you're going to switch to your water, then that might as well be Vaporeon instead of using your Mega for it. Now, obviously Mega Blastoise is better than Vaporeon, but Vaporeon is so splashable, whereas it feels like Blastoise actually isn't. It feels like you need a team specifically that hates dealing with something like Mega Arrow, like the dual electrics, for it to be used properly. It's going to not really like seeing Mega Venu, although it definitely can be one. It's still not going to like taking the earthquakes from Dugtrio and Rhydon. It doesn't really like switching into them as much. It's kind of a similar issue with Mega Venusaur. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to deny this is a very good Pokemon. It's definitely better at breaking through Mew long term with Dark Pulse than Vaporeon is with Shadow Ball. It's going to like taking the rock slides and whatnot better from Mega Aerodactyl, especially if it has Mega Evolved. It's going to stand up to Mega Beedrill way better, although I don't think you should ever be having this thing against Mega Beedrill. It can take the Thunderbolt too a little bit better than Vaporeon for these if you ever like need a clutch surf. And Aqua Jet is obviously still nice to have, although I feel like it doesn't get used as much. And part of the problem is whenever you're clicking Aqua Jet, you're actually playing a 50-50 with your opponent as to whether you are going to take that kill that you need the range to hit. But it's Vaporeon with better stats, but the cost of a Mega, which sometimes is worth it. It's actually worth it a good amount of the times, and I still think this is a very good Pokemon. It's very good on double electrics, and there's probably other teams it works on. But I do feel it's gotten a bit worse as Vaporeon's risen up. Um, but I do think these two are less interchangeable. Or sorry, well, I think these two are closer to performing the functions of water than something like Vaporeon and Starmie are, simply because they're just more aligned. And yeah, not really much to say more on Blastoise Z because I've already really talked about Vaporeon. And this is kind of just better Vaporeon. So let's move on. Now the next Pokemon I'm going to mention is Rhydon. Now it's pretty much, I don't know. Um, how do I describe this? It feels like whenever you use Rhydon, that you're telling your opponent that you're going to use Alolan Ductrio, but I'm more confident that you're going to get your plays wrong. Now, Rhydon does do a few things that Alolan Ductrio doesn't, but I feel like it takes a lot more skill to pilot Rhydon. I know some would say the opposite, where you just click substitute as Zapdos comes in. Um, but the difference is that Rhydon doesn't always actually do something where I feel like Dugtrio always does, and that alone is the clear breaker between these two. Even though Rhydon, in theory, can do a lot more than Dugtrio does, I feel like you have to get your calls right a lot more, and I feel like it's a bit easier to deal with sometimes. If you ever have a Rhydon and your opponent has one of these waters, you're going to hate playing that matchup because you know that say you're trying to switch this in on a Zapdos. If Zapdos clicks U-turn, suddenly you just lost a turn and you've given them a free surf, which maybe is manageable, if you have Mew or something, but still isn't great. You're playing more games that you don't want to have to play. You're on the back foot. That all that being said, this Pokemon's way better at handling Mega Arrow or Mega Beedrill or even Melmetal. And it's I think slightly better at handling Jolteon, and it is better at handling Zapdos long term because it doesn't fold through the Reflect Drill Peck set. Um, and this thing destroying Mew with the Mega Horn is pretty sick, and I do like it. But it also just feels like it's just not that consistent. It's not. I don't like using Rhydon because it's slow. But I'm also not going to deny that it can do most of the roles as Dugtrio can. And sometimes it can do even a bit more. I just feel like your play has to be a lot more solid. And it doesn't do some things that Dugtrio does as well, like getting that Toxic on you. Yeah, granted, you're usually getting your Earthquake, but Toxic is more recoverable. And not getting that Earthquake off on Vaporeon actually can be a big deal depending on late game scenarios. Not having that speed tie not Mega Gengar, I wish. On Gengar isn't as like it's just objectively worse. Um, uh, yeah, so that's kind of how I see Rhydon. It's just a less consistent Dugtrio, even though it can, in theory, do more. But it still will do the main job of Dugtrio, which is checking the electrics. Now, last Pokemon I'm going to do an A tier, and I don't like putting this in A tier, but I do think it is an A tier, is Clefable. Clefable is not a full Pokemon. It is 0.75 Pokemon, and you use Clefable when you want your Mew to do something else, and that is the only reason it exists. Clefable has, what, one set? It's just Thunder Wave, Moonblast, Flamethrower, um, Stealth Rocks. The only reason this thing exists is for you to use a different Mew set. And that kind of goes into the point of, like, well, you use 0.75% of a Pokemon to use 1.25% of a Pokemon, theoretically, because I feel like that's what Mew's doing most of the time. It uses setup set is it's just going to, like, it feels like with Nasty Plot you're going to take one Pokemon cleanly and then you're going to heavily damage another, and maybe that's worth it. It definitely has worked, I'm not going to deny that it has. I've tried Fable in the past and I just don't like using it, but it can do the function, it can do the thing. I will say, I don't know why, but for some reason, I was shocked. It was a miracle yesterday when I saw my Mew beat a Clefable, because I feel like every single damn Clefable hacks his Mew. I don't know why. It just feels like it Thunder Waves it. It always gets fully parried. It always like Moonblast drops. It always just doesn't happen for some reason. Even though theoretically, by the numbers, Mew should be beating Clefable. It just doesn't. But yeah, there's really not much to say about Clefable. Usually you're going to lead this thing, and you're going to hope, honestly, above all, that your opponent doesn't have Mega Beedrill, because that's when any gimmick set of Mew is really going to be worse. But you can't really talk about Mew without talking about, or sorry, you can't really talk about Clefable without talking about Mew, because that's really the whole reason this Pokemon exists. But yeah. I will be right back. I should remember to edit it out, but I have to use the restroom. I'm not BKC. I'm not going to leave you all hanging. So I will be right back. Gamers, I have returned. The rest of this list shouldn't take too long, hopefully. But yeah, upon consideration, I actually think that it was actually not A tier. I think it's B plus tier. I think the only reason I had an A tier in the preliminary ranking because I didn't want Rhydon to be alone. Because I like Rhydon. I like Rhydon very much as both. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, Clefable's kind of a hack. It's kind of a very specific Mon, and it really hates ever seeing a Mega Beedrill because the function that it is going to try and take away from you is usually going to not work as well. Anyways, the rest of this shouldn't take too long. Most of the garbage tiers are just going to be, me writing off and be like, hey, this is why this doesn't work, this is why this. But anyways, so some people might think this is pretty low. But the next Pokemon's going to be Starmie. There's a few reasons I don't like Starmie. First reason is it actually hates seeing these two megas. It doesn't even really like seeing any of the megas, but especially these two, and especially like a Beedrill, because they're just usually going to revenge kill it. Now, Crunch doesn't actually one-shot Starmie from Mega Aerodactyl, but it does a lot to where any chip on Starmie is generally not going to be worth it. The main reason I don't like Starmie is because it just is not strong enough. Surf does like 37% to Zapdos, and that is just like, what, like, that doesn't 2HKO, or I think it's a range 2HKO Zapdos after Stealth Rocks, and that's just sad. You can run Ice Beam, but Starmie also kind of has 4 move slot syndrome. It really wants to run, obviously it wants to run the Water Stab, and then Recover ideally, because it feels like it's going to perform much worse if it doesn't have Recover. Then it wants Thunderbolt, because it's part of the selling point of Starmie is to handle the waters, but then it also wants Psychic for Mega Venusaur and for Gengar. And all these things put together, it's like, and it kind of wants Thunder Wave too, so that it can like make progress versus you. It's just like, man, just run Vaporeon. Vaporeon's always going to do something anyways. And yes, Starmie has more roles it can function. It can be that Melmetal check, even if the Melmetal doesn't have Thunder Punch. Can still do that. That outspeeds Dugtrio, which is a big selling point. This is probably the best Dugtrio check in the tier, being honest. Although it can be complicated if your opponent does have Sucker Punch, and you believe in that set for some reason. It can also, it can break through the Mew, although I find this less likely, because Because one of the things with Starmie is to make up for the power deficit that you don't have running Surf with Vaporeon is you have to run Hydro Pump. And clean Hydro Pump, to me, will always feel awful. Maybe that's just Nuzlocke blood, but like it's just like I've seen so many games where Starmie just misses the Hydro Pump. It's like, well, GG. And then I've also seen about as many games where it clicks Surf and Surf doesn't perform, and then it's like, well, why are you using Starmie? Just use Vaporeon. And that's really the crux of it at the end of the day, is that I think Vaporeon is just much more consistent. It's going to fill most of the jobs anyways. It can do a few things that you can't. Um, it's more predictable, but it's also a lot more consistent. I think that both waters are better, but those roles, like being able to get a faster hit off on Mega Venu, can be impactful. Can also be impactful outspeeding that Dugtrio, getting that hit off on Zapdos, maybe to chip it, maybe to get yourself in a better position to revenge kill something, so that you don't have to commit like your Mega taking a Rocks chip. Stuff like that can be very good. So yeah, and like you said, B plus is kind of the cutoff as to what I would use personally. I think it's also the reason why Clefable was an A tier, but I don't like using Starmie. I acknowledge that it can do stuff, but I feel like it's like infinitely more inconsistent than using either of these two waters. So I don't recommend. I don't like it as much. Um, and now, this is also probably the second hottest take, is the Jolteon being this high, but I am going to put Mega Venu next. Now, Mega Venu, I feel like, is the most awkward Pokemon in the tier, because it feels like it's easy to use and hard to use at the same time, and that it does so many good things, but also fails to do those good things. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you might be like, well, Mega Venusaur is actually a really good Dugtrio check, but I feel like that isn't true most of the time, because you come in with your Venusaur and Dugtrio clicks Earthquake, and then your Venusaur takes like 43% total, and yeah, you threaten with the Mega Drain, and Dugtrio's not going to stay in, but then you kind of just like, you like go to like Gengar or Mew or something, and then it just doesn't get the job done, or like even Zapdos can work sometimes if it has Drill Peck, or which honestly I think the Drill Peck's selling point is more for Dugtrio at this point than for Mega Venu. But then like maybe Venu can use like Reflect, and then it kind of gets weird. But then it gets weird, Then Melmetal comes in without Sleep Powder. It might just T-Wave and like flinch you with Double Iron Bash. If the cards are like lined up right, and it's like, sometimes it feels like the mon you're trying to switch Mega Venusaur into, like a Vaporeon or a Blastoise Z. Sometimes they'll just click Ice Beam anyways, because they're going to predict your switch, or sometimes it just won't do anything at all because the Mega Beedrill is going to be on the team. And a Gengar can also be on the team, and it's going to be very annoying. And sometimes your Leech Seed won't hit. It just feels like, I don't know, it feels like the role that Mega Venusaur has kind of just isn't there a lot of the time. I feel, I don't know, it's had a bad mon feel. If you've ever played Fire Emblem, you know what good unit feel is and bad unit feel is. That's kind of how I feel about Mega Venusaur. It just doesn't feel like it ever does as good. And then you'll like bring it to like a double Mega Team, and spoiler warning. Let me just get that out of the way since I'm talking about this now. Like really, when it doesn't have the stats, it does not want to perform like as well. Like Mew is just going to annihilate you. The synergy you lose of using Sleep Powder, this happened to me yesterday, and I actually think it is relevant, is that if you're using like Toxic Mew and Sleep Powder Venu, or like any status that Mew gets on itself, suddenly makes your Venusaur just like, it's just impossible, because then Mew is just going to click Psychic, and then something else is going to revenge kill the team on the Venu once that guy goes down. It can work, I feel like this is a Pokemon that just also loses the practicality measure of like these two up here, where you can just like click usually good moves and they're going to work out. I feel like you have to get your turns right with Mega Venu, or it's just not going to do it. It's not going to get the job done. And I know some people will be like, well, just click Leech Seed, but first of all, Leech Seed can miss, and missing in Let's Go is disastrous because it's such a fast-paced tier. Part of the reason why Starmie is down here is because of that reason. Part of the reason, like I'm saying, Vaporeon is so good is it's using Surf. You'll see most of the higher Pokemon up here don't really have inaccurate moves, and then things like Missable Thunder Wave, Missable Mega Horn on a Mew, Missable Hydro Pump, Missable Sleep Powder, Missable Leech Seed. The only Pokemon up here that usually has an accuracy sensitive move that it really wants to collect. Because yeah, these two can use like Toxic and Thunder Wave and stuff, but it feels like Mega Aerodactyl is the only Pokemon up here where it's like it's clicking one of its most important moves where it has a chance to miss. But that move, more often than it missing, will just tax your opponent anyways. So I don't know. I haven't felt comfortable using Mega Venu in a long time. And even though it has great selling points, it feels like it never gets that to achieve those selling points because it needs both perfect play, it needs the right matchup, and it needs and it needs to be able to like hit that leech seed or hit that sleep powder. You can even like poisoning you with sludge bomb, which has been relevant in the past, is still like a factor. And I don't like using this mon anymore. I used to, but yeah, I've in the past I've like put this at number 2. But I feel like it's by far the worst Mega out of you should be using. And part of that is because Mega Beedrill, I just feel, has gotten better over time. This Pokemon, I feel like, it just does not work as well. I get how annoying it can be to fight, but A, you always have your trusty Melmetal as a potential check, and B, it like the function of like switching into Dugtrio isn't actually as reliably well handled as you think. Now, this is the last Pokemon I think you could run on a seriously viable team, is what's in B, and I'm gonna start with good old Alolan Muck. The more this goes on, the less I have to say about these Pokemon, but this role isn't much of a secret. This is I think it's ironic that the best Mew check in the game, the best guaranteed number 1 top 1 should be on every team Pokemon. The best check to that in the game is all the way down here. But I mean, that's kind of just how I feel. So what's wrong with Muck? Well, for starters, most teams, all the way like around here, these 3 Pokemon have easy revenge killing potential against Muck, and that's already pretty bad because Muck is so slow. And because Mew is more expendable, Mew does often feel like it's one of the first Pokemon to go down in any given match, because it's usually getting that Stealth Rock, so it doesn't have all the moves it wants to click. It feels like Muck is less valuable once that does happen. Other things that are potentially problematic is it doesn't actually do that much damage, unless there's a Gengar, and I guess this could be partially a mark against Gengar, although I don't think it's actually as relevant because Muck has fallen out of favor a while ago. It doesn't do as much damage as you want it to, because like Crunch is going to hit like something like, I don't know, Vaporeon, and Vaporeon's gonna be like, whatever. It's a 3-hit KO. 2 Surfs is usually going to be enough because Muck is so slow that it's going to get worn down. Similar things can happen when you're using Zapdos, and although usually at that point you're playing will they switch in their ground type game. It can use Toxic to break through some of its checks, but I don't know, it doesn't feel like it has the longevity to really justify that. It sounds like you can come into Muck a lot, which, I mean, I am ranking it at the bottom of usable Pokemon, so I guess that's partially true. But it is important to note that Melmetal doesn't really want to be in against it because it's going to click Fire Blast and it's going to take the chunk and then Mega is going to Revenge Kill it afterwards. Mew never wants to be in this, although that's part of the problem is that Mew can always just U-turn on this thing and then go into a more safe check like Zapdos because it doesn't really threaten that much damage at the end of the day anyways. And it feels very hard to slot because it is only doing one specific job, and it doesn't even always like fulfill that job as well as you'd like it to. I guess this could also be considered a good nonsense breaker, though, kind of in a similar way of Mega B. Usually, Mew is going to be the one performing the most amount of nonsense in any given game anyways, because it's the most versatile Pokemon in the game. You're not going to see that from like a Clefable, because Clefable doesn't have anything else to run. I guess this can be good versus Starmie, can definitely be good versus Mega Venu. But as you can see, the rest of the matchups, it's like Wins is favorable because Mega Melm never wants to take that hit. Then it's like loses. Maybe it's like even here. Loses, wins cleanly, loses. I think it loses cleanly, although I don't know if Mega Drain versus Earthquake is a good check. I don't think it kills right on. I don't care enough to do the calc right now. But you're still gonna lose, be down -1. Loses, ironically, wins cleanly and wins cleanly. So it's very uneven. It's weird to call it a matchup fish because it's always going to check Mew, but that's honestly just how I feel. But hey, it can still work. It's something I would never bring, but I feel like this is one of the this is like probably the best thing. I feel like this Pokemon could rise up too in popularity, given the right circumstances. So that too. If more people use weirder Mew sets, and more people try and like matchup fish, then this definitely could be more popular. But as of right now, I don't like it very much. And we'll have to see if other people use it in the future. Next in B tier, I think I have two more Pokemon I want to put in here. The next is going to be Mega Gyarados. It's no secret that Mega Gyarados has been on the decline in favor of Mega Blastoise for a while now. And that's just because it's a lot harder to use. Like to these two Megas up here and Mega Venusaur as well. Melmetal's always going to check it in any given game. Even if you have countermeasures such as like substitute an Earthquake, which most you'll usually have anyways. It's usually going to take Rock's Chip, or if it's not taking Rock's Chip, it's going to take it soon enough. Reflect Zapdos is incredibly annoying. And when you're ever in a position too of like someone switching in a ground type on your Zapdos, the one thing you don't want them clicking is Reflect, because it means whatever ground type you switch in next is going to do less overall. And I feel like that can happen with Mega Gyarados the most because it's easy to click Reflect against Mega Gyarados because it's going to make you win that matchup instead. Similarly, if your big selling point is crunching the Mew, but if Mew uses U-turn, that's not great for Mega Gyarados. It's going to hate seeing a Mega B in any regard. And ultimately, the biggest problem out of everything here is Blastoise does its job just a little bit better most of the time, I'd say. Even though it can't, do that big, massive hit on Mew, strongest hit on Mew in the game, it's generally not worth it because Blastoise can hit Mew anyways, and yeah, it's just a lot more inconsistent, but it can work. There might be even situations where it's better, but those situations aren't the current metagame, unfortunately, and I would recommend personally not using this Pokemon, although it's not complete garbage like other Pokemon will be later. The last Pokemon I'm going to put in B, and this is very, very, very tentative. You'd never catch me dead running this, but it actually is Kingler, surprisingly. And that's solely because it feels like these two guys are becoming a lot more popular. And Kingler is the best Pokemon at handling Mega Arrow out of all the waters, aside from dedicating your Mega, and kind of Beedrill, although I don't think that's super great either. It's really popping off there for Kingler. It is really good. It can get those big hits in, but it feels like it's way too risky. Part of that is because the attacks it's using are inherently risky because it's using like Crab Hammer, which can miss for these guys, and Rhydon too. Although Crab Hammer does do a lot of damage to like everything, because Kingler's attack is so good. Yeah. And then even though you have the superpower for Melm, it also means like superpower, and it doesn't feel like you're actually going to check it that well either. X's isn't going to do that much to Mew at the end of the day, and I'm not a big fan. But if there's any Pokemon I think that could actually rise up, I actually do think it's this guy. Aside from my beloved dream one day of to where is he? Tentacruel, might give it Tentacruel. One day I'm going to make this thing work, I promise. But it won't be anytime soon, that's for sure. This is a very, very, very tentative recommendation. Vaporeon's always going to do the job more consistently and better, but I think if you really think they're bringing one of these two, it might be like 2 to 5% better than using Vaporeon, assuming your attacks connect. Anyways, these are all the Pokemon I think Putting Kingler in OU is stretching it, but I'm willing to see what people do with it in the future. Putting Gyarados in that OU is also tempting. Muk can definitely be OU. I guess you could say it could be this, and you could put these two down here. But this is the most important list, and the things I feel actually ranking. This would be my viability ranking, and yes, it is ordered. In the order that they come in. So yeah. So why do these Pokemon not work down here? I guess I should start with the big smoking gun. The big hot topic of this tournament has been Charizard. I guess Charizard at the top of this, although I don't think being at the top of the garbage pile is necessarily something worth writing home about. I actually don't know, and I'll when I collect my thoughts as I rank these Pokemon a bit more, if that's true. But the appeal of Charizard's pretty simple. Melmetal's on each team. Fire Blast hits pretty hard. Nothing really wants to switch into Fire Blast that much. But why is Mega Charizard so bad? I'll tell you why Mega Charizard is so bad. It's because of these two water types right here that are on a lot of teams. It's a range to kill Mew anyways, and then you have to play games with the Mew as to whether you're going to Psychic or Stealth Rocks. It hampers your lead game because you have to lead this first because you don't want to take 50% of Rocks damage in the future. It's always going to hate running into Aerodactyl. It's kind of going to hate running into Mega Beedrill. It's going to hate running into Dugtrio. On the plus side, it actually handles Zapdos, Jolteon pretty well. Suppose it could go even with this, and actually probably Life at the end of the day seem right on because I think Fire Blast into Dragon Pulse is going to kill. Either way, it's going to set up Zapdos pretty nicely later, so that's pretty good. It does love seeing Mega Venu. Hey, I think it's whatever about seeing Starmie. Fable is like a hack anyways, but you're playing such a weird lead game too if you're playing Zara. I have no idea what happens when Clefable and Charizard gets led, and I never will because I'm never going to use either of these two. Well, maybe Clefable someday if I feel like having fun. But I'm not using this guy. This Pokemon's very, very, very inconsistent. Thinking Fire Blast has a chance to miss you. You already know how I feel about that. I feel like this isn't a great Pokemon at the end of the day. Yes, it can break through a Mew, but usually Mew's going to get its most important job, which is setting up Stealth Rocks and maybe even clicking Psychic along the way. I don't think it's a worthy trade because Mega Aerodactyl is just going to revenge kill you and you're never going to get Charizard never again. Don't use this thing if you want to win. I don't care how many people make a somewhat deep run with Charizard. It's never going to be a real Pokemon for me. I don't believe it showed up any time within semifinals, whereas I think every other Mega did. The opportunity cost is great, and in a way that actually makes it worse than all these guys because it is taking the opportunity cost of your Mega Evolution, which is terrible. I guess the next best Pokemon I'd say out of all of these would be Aerodactyl. I think base Aerodactyl is better than base Venu when you're running a dual mecha team, but I don't think it's that great anyways. I think go all in on using the best Mega in the tier. The taunt Stealth Rocks doesn't actually work as well as you might think it does. I think you're actually fishing for a toxic flamethrower Mew set more than you're fishing for a Stealth Rocks. And in general, because you're going to taunt a Mew, it's going to click Psychic twice, and you're not going to threaten the offense back, and eventually you're going to have to play a perfect game if you're ever trying to keep the rocks off. And what are you even trying to keep the rocks off at that point? Because regular Aerodactyl and Mega B, it doesn't feel that great. And you're not going to be running super Rock Squeaks Pokemon besides that. You're going to run maybe Zapdos. I know people have tried using the Gyarados, but it still doesn't feel that great. Just me clicking Psychic, that's actually going to do enough to the point where it's like, why did you even bother keeping off the rocks for your Gyarados so it doesn't have to take that Rock chip? It's just going to take the Psychic chip anyways. It can work, I suppose. I think you're playing too perfect of a game. But it can be nice to have this. It can be nice to have a Dugtrio Revenge Killer. I guess it can be nice to have a Rock Slide Flinch button too, although I don't like it personally. It can be nice to have something that outspeeds Gengar. It can be nice to have something that outspeeds. Having a fast Pokemon is nice in this tier, or at least when I say fast Pokemon, I mean like faster than this. It's part of the good thing about Starmie is that when you're choosing a Revenge Kill, who will likely get counterpicked when your opponent sends something in. It's nicer to have a more useless Pokemon, ironically, or a Pokemon that forces into a less autopilot move. But I don't really like the dual Mega teams much. Mega Aerodactyl is the best Mega in the tier. Nobody disputes this. I don't feel the need to compromise between choosing between the best Mega in the tier and a Pokemon that sometimes doesn't perform at its Mega, and you're usually only using it against Blastoise anyways. I'm not ranking Alolan Executor next. I hate Alolan Executor, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I think Blast or Snorlax actually would have the highest chance of doing something. But Melmetal exists, and Double Iron Bash actually outspeeds Snorlax, and you just get flinched to death. That kind of explains why I don't like it. Its appeal is kind of obvious outside of that. You know, it beats Mew. Well, theoretically, it beats Mew. It is Jolteon switching, although usually they'll have Substitute, Yawn, Reflect, one of those. Two of those three, and two of those three are usually going to be enough to ruin you. Can beat Zapdos, I guess, hey. But rest is really exploitable, and I don't like it. Could I guess beat Gengar pretty well, although they're kind of gonna like switch out, use something else to beat you anyways. I don't know, it's not very real Pokemon. That's how I feel about all these. So let's talk about the big one, because I think this is the next best. Why do I hate Alolan Executor? I thought about actually making a whole video on this, but I would have had to scour a shit ton of replays, and I didn't feel like doing that. Simple answer as to why this thing doesn't exist is it doesn't actually check any of the Pokemon you're trying to check with it. What do I mean by that? I've seen this situation like 20 times where I have Alolan Dugtrio and they have Alolan Executor, and my Dugtrio's in against like a Zapdos or something, and they try not to immediately feel like dog shit, clicking U-turn, you know, because when it just feels so bad when you click U-turn with Zapdos immediately as you bring it in, because you know they're gonna bring in their Alolan Dugtrio or their Rhydon. So they'll like try to click Reflect because that'll do the most outside of that. So then I'll click Substitute because I always want to click Substitute because Substitute's a good move. And then they'll bring in Alolan Executor, and then I'll be with Sub Up, and they'll have their Alolan Executor, and then I'll Toxic it, and then their Alolan Executor is crippled. I'll go into Mew, they can't break through it, or they'll have to play a Dragon Tail Lottery, which will go into their favor about as much as it will go into mine. Please stop using Alolan Executor. It's not a real Pokemon. It's not actually going to check Alolan Dugtrio. And let's say, what's its next job? You know, not handling this. It's not handling this. I mean, Flamethrower trading with this is a good thing, but it's still losing. You know, at the end of the day, if your plans are solid enough against whatever Mega they have in the back. Say you have like an Aerodactyl against a Beedrill. Definitely not winning against this thing. It's not even worth the trade. Theoretically was beating this thing until I described the situation that applies to you. Because Alolan Executor always comes in early because you're trying to use it to prevent Dugtrio, because otherwise it's going to get sacked and then Dugtrio is going to run through anyways. Lol. It is good against this, I guess, technically, although clicking Shadow Ball or Yawn, usually Alolan Executor is going to hate that anyways. And it is a sad world where Vaporeon cleanly beats Alolan Executor, because no Vaporeon should ever go without Ice Beam. When Ice Beam is going to kill you, you're going to feel like an idiot for thinking your Grass type could beat a Water type. Gengar is going to beat it. Blastoise is going to beat it. Theoretically, the same thing where it's going to happen with Mew is they're going to send in Zapdos. They're going to sub. They're going to Mega Horn you, and you're down a Pokemon. You're not going to beat this. You do beat this if it doesn't have Ice Beam, although if it clicks Psychic, I think you're in a bad position anyways. You're never beating this. Never beating this. You're never beating this. You're definitely beating this, probably. See how many Pokemon Alolan Executor actually beats here? It's only beating these ground types if they don't click Substitute on this, or they aren't getting the right move. And even Earthquake as this thing comes in, it's not really that bad, because I'll just go to Mew, and usually I'll have something that's able to Revenge Kill it after I like Psychic or something, or you're having to play a Mind Game with Toxic. Please don't use this Pokemon. It's terrible. I hate it. I hate every time I see this thing. I hate it being anywhere other than garbage tier in a viability ranking. I hate this thing so much. Please don't use it. Speaking of Pokemon like that, Nidoqueen is also similarly terrible. The only thing that Nidoqueen does really well is it switches into Jolteon, hey. Megavenu does that anyways, though. And I don't even like Megavenu. This thing is fake. You can't use it as a lead because it's just going to get Psychic by Mew. What's going to happen is you're both going to click Stealth Rocks. Mew's going to do Psychic. You're going to take more. Mew's going to click Psychic again. And the Super Fang that you clicked, which is also inaccurate, by the way, you're going to have a hard time fighting something that Revenge kills unless you're using a specific team. You can't switch into something. Say you switch into Gengar, it's going to get blasted by Psychic. I think Gengar does live, but it's not going to live a move past that. It's going to get Revenge killed and chased out. Anyways, I don't think it lives Psychic plus 2 rocks. You're not going to want to switch in arrow because it's going to cut the time you use arrow too much. Doctora's not going to be able to pick up a kill. You're not going to switch this into psychic. Guess it could switch into this thing. Hey, don't like it personally though. Please, just like, dude, just don't use this thing. I don't know why I kept seeing people use this thing. It drove me nuts. Lily was using it to some effect, but I don't know. I would never lose to Nidoqueen. Is all I'm saying. I would never. And Nidoking's the same thing. I don't need it's worse. It's switching into Jolteon. So the one thing that Nidoqueen does that's actually valuable is rendered mood. Poliwrath used to be good because it used to be an arrow check, but it's not as good anymore because Vaporeon does its job better. Wing attack still is on a lot of arrows. And it doesn't usually do as much as this thing. It hates running into Mew. Giving Mew free psychics is generally what's. This is in a way better in the Mega Zam era, because you could like switch this in, like when Mew switches in, you toxic, and then you go into Alolan Muck, and you're still making some progress there, but it's fallen out of favor. Eve made a good point where Vaporeon is what we wanted Poliwrath to be all along. And the last one is Cloyster. I guess it should be here, which makes me sad because I feel like every time I see Cloyster, it should do something, but it's just Invalid if there's ever a water type on the opponent's field. But it's not a water type; it's actually pretty good. But I feel like most teams should run a water type because water's a good type. I guess this is the bottom. And because I don't want anyone viability ranking either of these, I'm going to switch them up in random order. I guess you could use what I used previously, but these Pokemon are all fake. I would refuse to rank these in any actual viability ranking series. Aerodactyl would be the best, though. I guess if you really need a position, Aerodactyl would be here, although I don't believe it should be in OU. I don't really think Kingler should be in OU, to be fair, but I think it's the Pokemon that has the highest chance to be OU. But yeah, this is the list. To just make a good fine point, I've said in the past, I think it was a bit incorrect that I only believe in about 8 Pokemon in this tier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wait, this is 8? No, 7. I'm Spoon. This would probably be the 8, I guess, technically, but these are viable. A plus through A. I personally would not run anything that's in B plus in the near future, though. I wouldn't have a good reason to. Really run right on to begin with, to be honest, but that's not a me problem. Well, that is a me problem because Rhydon is good Pokemon. But yeah, this is how I see the tier currently. I guess I'll put the original rankings back up. But yeah, that is the Let's Go tier list. Like I said, if this wants to be taken from my viability ranking, go ahead, but I refuse to engage in smug on bureaucracy because it's a mess. And yeah, so I guess that's it. I should have the replays up soon of the tournament, so if you want justification for these slots being the way they are, look forward to that. And outside of that, I guess that's all for me. Like, comment, subscribe, hey, whatever. You have enough people telling you to do that. Ciao.